The frost came down hard that year, the way it does before a bad winter, and it brought with it the smell of the village all at once. Wet wool, cold stone, and the thin grey smoke of coal fires that never quite warmed anything. Hartwell smelled that way from Michaelmas to March, and nobody remarked on it, because nobody remembered a Hartwell that smelt any other way. Nell Farrow was the kind of woman a room forgot the moment she left it. She was 25, thin in the wrists, plain in the face, and she had a way of standing so still in a doorway that people walked past her without seeing she was there at all. She mended linen for 3 houses in the village and taught her letters to nobody, because nobody had asked, and she moved through her days the way water moves through a ditch that has worn itself smooth, quietly, without complaint, without being noticed. She had not always been so quiet. Her father had been a dancing master, once in a better town, with a better name, before the debts came and took the name with them. He had taught her the figures before he taught her letters. She did not dance now. There was no call for it, and no coin in it, and the room where she had learned the steps had burned down with everything else her father owned. But her body had not forgotten. It never forgot. She still walked with her weight, balanced the way he had shown her, heel and toe, as if the floor might ask something of her at any moment. The foundling home at the edge of Hartwell was going to lose its roof before the spring came. Everyone said so. The rafters had gone soft with rot, and the funds that were meant to mend them had gone instead to feed the children through a hard autumn, and nobody with money enough to matter had troubled to look at it twice. Nell knew this because she went there on Tuesdays, when the mending was light, to sit with the children who had nobody to sit with them. That was where she had found Tam. He was 10, or near enough, a stable boy from the Merrifield estate, who had come to the foundling home after a cart horse took fright and crushed his leg against a post. The surgeon who had seen him had set the bone and said the boy would walk, in time, if the leg were not left to stiffen. Nobody had time. The foundling home had 2 women for 30 children, and no coin for a physician's daily visits, and so Tam sat in a corner with his leg bent under him like a folded page, and it was going stiffer every week, and nobody had noticed but Nell. She had not told anyone what she meant to do about it. She had simply begun to do it. Twice a week she came early, before the mending, and she took Tam into the old hayloft above the Merrifield stables, because it was warm there from the animals below, and because nobody used it, and because it had a floor wide enough and clear enough for what she had in mind. She had not asked the head groom's leave. She had simply gone, the first time, and no one had stopped her, and so she had gone back. She knelt by the boy in the gold straw light and took his ruined leg in both hands, careful as a woman handling eggs. "It will hurt," she said. "I will not lie to you about that. Everything hurts," Tam said. He said it the way children say true things, without weight, as if it were the price of bread. "Then we will make this hurt count for something." She began to move the leg through the figures her father had taught her 20 years before. Slow at first, bending the knee the width of a hair, straightening it, bending it again, not dancing, not yet, only the shape of it, borrowed for a use her father had never intended. The boy's face went white, and then grey, and then, slowly, settled into something like concentration. "Again," he said, through his teeth. Again, she agreed. She did this for an hour, twice a week, for coin nobody offered and she would not have taken. She did it because the leg was going stiff, and stiffness was a door that closed itself a little further shut every week it was left alone. and because nobody else was going to open it, and because it did not occur to her that a thing needed a reason beyond that. The rafters above the loft creaked with the wind. Somewhere below a horse shifted its weight against a stall board. Nell did not look up. She did not know that anyone was there to look at. She was going to keep coming, whatever the weather did, whatever anyone said, because the bridge between a boy who could not walk and a boy who could was made of exactly this, an hour, twice a week, given by someone who did not expect to be thanked for it. She did not think of it as a kindness. She thought of it as arithmetic. A leg bent was a leg that could be straightened if someone troubled to do the sum. She did not know then that the loft had a second door, on the far side above the tack room, and that a man had come in through it not 10 minutes before, meaning only to look at a mare with a swollen fetlock, and had stayed instead in the shadow of a hanging bridle to watch a woman in a mended grey dress teach a crippled child to bend his knee like a dance, for no one, and for nothing, and for no reason at all, except that it needed doing. He watched the whole hour through. He did not make himself known. That, too, she did not know. The man in the shadow of the tack room did not give his name to the head groom that week, nor the week after. He said only that he was called Rafe, that he had been sent to look over the stock before the master returned from London, and the head groom, who had never met the master, and took his instructions from a steward 3 removes distant, saw no reason to press further. A hired man who knew horses and asked no wages beyond his board was not a thing to be questioned in a hard winter. He came and went as he liked. He slept in the harness room. He asked once, in an idle way, after the girl who came Tuesdays and Thursdays to see the boy with the bad leg, and the head groom said only that she was called Pharaoh, that she asked for nothing, and that she was, in his opinion, the only sensible creature to set foot in the yard since Michaelmas. The man who called himself Rafe was, in fact, Julian Thorne, Duke of Merrifield, 5 months into a title he had not wanted, and had not expected, and 3 months into a grief he had not yet found the bottom of. His brother had died of a fever in the spring. Julian had been the second son, content to be a second son, with a commission and a horse, and no particular ambition beyond both, and then his brother was gone, and the whole weight of Merrifield had come down on him at once. Land and tenants and debts, and a house full of servants who called him Your Grace, in a tone that still made him look over his shoulder for the man they meant. He had come north to see the estate that was now his, because he trusted no one's report of it but his own, and because London that winter held a betrothal he had broken, and did not care to be near the ruins of. The betrothal had ended over a small thing that was not small at all. His intended, a baron's daughter with a fine laugh, had struck a housemaid across the face for spilling wax on a gown, and had laughed about it after, lightly, expecting him to laugh with her. He had not laughed. He had ended the engagement within the week, and had been called cold for it by everyone who heard the story, because nobody outside the room had seen the maid's face, only the broken contract, and a broken contract was easier to gossip about than a struck girl. He had come to believe since then that people showed you exactly who they were the moment they believed no one of consequence was watching. It was the only test he trusted any more. Manners could be taught. Kindness in front of an audience could be practised, like a curtsy. But a woman kneeling in cold straw, working a beggar child's ruined leg for an hour, expecting no one to see and asking nothing when they did, that was not a thing that could be performed. That was simply what she was. He did not introduce himself. He told himself it was prudence, that a duke newly come into his estate could not go about the yard asking questions without setting the whole county talking, and that was true as far as it went. But it was not the whole of it. He wanted, very badly, to see what she did next. And he understood that the moment she knew who he was, she would stop being simply Nell Farrow and start being a woman in front of a duke, and he had had enough, in London, of women in front of dukes. She did not know that the hired man who nodded to her civilly in the yard, and once held the loft ladder steady for her without being asked, was the master of everything she could see from that yard, the house, the stables, the very straw under her knees. She did not know that he had begun, without quite deciding to arrange his days so that he might be somewhere near the loft on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. She only knew that Tam's leg was bending a little further each week, and that the hired man called Rafe had quiet hands with horses, and that he watched her work sometimes with an expression she could not read, and did not try very hard to. The head groom mentioned to her, on a bitter Thursday in the third week, that the master's steward had sent extra blankets down for the boy, and a note that a physician was to call once a fortnight at the estate's expense, no fee to fall on the foundling home. Nell asked who had ordered it. The head groom said he did not know, only that the order had come down clear, and would not be argued with, and that whoever it was had asked that no name be given. Someone with a conscience, then, Nell said, and a want of vanity to go with it. That is rarer than the money. She did not offer thanks to anyone, because there was no one to offer them to. She only knelt again in the straw the following Tuesday, and took up the boy's leg, and began the count. 1, 2, bend, straighten. Again, she was not to know, not yet, how closely the count was being kept by someone besides herself. The physician came as promised, a dry, competent man named Godwin, who examined Tam's leg with cold fingers, and pronounced, at the end of the second visit, that the boy would very likely walk sound within the year, provided the exercises continued exactly as they were. He said this to Nell as though she were a colleague, which surprised her, and she found she did not dislike it. "Someone has done this boy a great kindness," Godwin said, packing his instruments. "The blankets, the visits. Do you know who arranged it?" "No," said Nell. "The groom says he doesn't know either." "Convenient," Godwin said, in a tone that suggested he did not believe it for a moment, and left it there. Nell did not press it further. She had learned, over 5 years of scraping a living from mending and small charities, that a gift offered without a name attached was a gift that wanted nothing back, and a gift that wanted nothing back was not a thing to interrogate. You took it, and you used it well, and you did not go looking for the giver's face, because the giver had troubled to hide it, and that trouble deserved respect. She did not offer payment to the head groom, though he tried twice to put coin in her hand, saying the master's steward had left a sum for her trouble. She refused it both times, plainly, without heat. "I would have done it for anyone," she said. "I did not do it to be paid." "Aye," the groom said, "that's rather the trouble, isn't it? Nobody knows what to do with a woman who won't take money." "Give it to the boy, then," Nell said. "He can want for boots before I want for coin." The groom told this to the man called Rafe that evening, over the mash pails, more amused than he had any right to be. Rafe, who was in fact leaning against a stall door with a lantern and an expression the groom took for tiredness, and was in fact something nearer to being struck, said only that the girl sounded sensible, and asked no more questions that night, though he thought of little else. He began, that week, to make small further arrangements, each one without his name on it. The landlord who held the lease on Nell's cottage received a quiet instruction that her rent arrears, 3 months owed since the autumn, were to be considered settled, the sum to come from a fund the steward would not name. The Foundling Home's rotten rafters were quietly measured by a carpenter who arrived unannounced, and said only that his fee had already been met. A pair of small boots, the right size for a boy with a mending leg, appeared at the Foundling Home door, with no note at all. Julian told himself each time that it was simple charity, the kind any man of conscience with the means for it ought to practice, and that it had nothing particular to do with the woman in the loft. He told himself this less and less convincingly as the weeks went on. He came to the loft himself, on the pretext of mending a bridle that did not, in truth, need mending, on the second Thursday of the new year, while Nell worked the boy's leg through its paces in the cold gold light. "He's stronger," Rafe said from the doorway, not quite a question. "He is." Nell did not look up. "Another season and he'll run you off your own land, hired man. It's not my land." "No," she agreed. "I don't suppose it is." She glanced at him then, properly, the way she had not troubled to before. He had the look of a man who worked, hard hands, a coat too plain for a duke's stable, and too well made for a common groom, though she did not think that far. "You watch a great deal for a man who's only here to see to the horses. There isn't much else to do of an evening." "There's the tavern." "I don't care for the tavern." "No," she said. "You don't look as though you would." She bent back to the boy's leg. Bend it, Tam, slower, there. Good. Rafe watched her hands a moment longer than the task required. "You do this for nothing," he said. "I do it because it wants doing. That isn't an answer. It's the only one I've got." She straightened, brushing straw from her skirt, and looked at him with the plain directness that made half of Hartwell uneasy, and the other half quietly. Trust her. "Why does it trouble you so, that a person might do a thing and want nothing back for it?" He was quiet a moment. The wind found a gap in the loft boards and worried at it. "I was engaged to be married," he said, "to a woman who did a great many kind things, in front of a great many people. I never once saw her do one when she thought no one worth impressing was in the room." Nell said nothing to that for a moment. "Then, that must have been a hard thing to learn." "It was." "Was she cruel then, underneath? She struck a servant girl for a spilled candle and laughed about it after." He said it flatly, the way a man reports a fact he has worn smooth with turning over. "I ended it within the week. I was called cold for it, by people who had not seen the girl's face. They would call you a great many things," Nell said, "before they called you cruel for refusing to marry cruelty. Fair is not the same as kind. There is a difference, and most people never trouble to learn it." He looked at her a moment, and something in his face eased, briefly, the way ice eases before it breaks. "No," he said, "most people don't." Tam, from the straw, said, "Are you two going to talk, or is she going to bend my leg some more? Because it's the bending that's doing the good, not the talking." And Rafe laughed, short and startled, as though the sound surprised him coming out of his own chest, and Nell found herself smiling despite the cold, and it occurred to her, distantly, that she had not smiled like that in a long while. "Bend your leg, then," she told Tam, still smiling, "since you're so wise about it." And Rafe stood in the doorway a moment longer before he found some reason to be needed elsewhere, and did not look back until he was quite sure she would not see his face. The New Year assembly at Merrifield Hall was the first the house had held since Julian's brother died, and half the county came for the novelty of seeing the new Duke as much as for the dancing. Nell had no cause to be there at all, save that Mrs. Prynne, the housekeeper, had asked her that week to deliver a repaired length of lace for the drawing-room curtains, and had then, seeing the state of Nell's one good dress, pressed her bodily into a borrowed shawl, and told her she would stay for an hour and eat something warm before she walked home in the dark. And that was that. Mrs. Prynne was not a woman who took no for an answer when she had decided a thing was owed to someone. Nell stood at the edge of the ballroom, out of the candlelight's best reach, the way she stood at the edge of every room, and watched people she did not know dance figures her own body still remembered without being asked. Lady Cordelia Thorne found her there within the half-hour. Cordelia was Julian's cousin, the daughter of his father's younger brother, handsome in the hard, finished way of a woman who has been told since the cradle that her face was an asset to be managed. She had expected, since Julian's brother died, that the title would eventually require a wife, and had spent the winter arranging herself to be considered for it, an arrangement made considerably less comfortable by the presence of a duke who showed no particular interest in being arranged for. How very good of the servants to bring their friends, Cordelia said, to no one in particular, in a voice pitched to carry to the 3 nearest groups. Is that the mending girl? Farrow, is it not? I confess I did not know the standard had fallen so far that we dressed the seamstresses and set them among the guests. There was the small ripple of laughter that follows a cruelty delivered in fine clothes. Nell did not flush. She had had a great deal of practice not flushing. I came to deliver lace, my lady, she said plainly, not to dance. I'll trouble no one's evening. How admirably you know your place, Cordelia said, and her laugh came again, 3 practised beats, bright as a bell and just as hollow, though I wonder that you know it at all, given how freely you've been let run tame about the stables. My cousin's grooms speak of nothing else. The girl who kneels in the straw with the cripple boy. Very touching, I'm sure, if one has a taste for that sort of spectacle. He is not a spectacle, Nell said. He is a child with a leg that wants mending, and I have 2 good hands and an hour to spare. I don't ask that anyone find it touching. No, Cordelia said. I don't suppose you would think to ask for anything, would you? It's such a convenient sort of virtue, poverty. It costs nothing to be humble when one has nothing to be humble about. The room had gone quieter than the music accounted for. Nell felt the cold of it settle on her shoulders, like the shawl had never been lent at all. She did not answer. She had learned, a long time ago, that some cruelties were better let fall to the floor than caught and thrown back, because the throwing back was what people remembered, not the cruelty that started it. It was into that silence that Julian Thorne crossed the floor. He had heard the last of it from the doorway, and something in his face had gone very still. The stillness of a man who has decided something and does not intend to be argued out of it. He stopped in front of Nell and offered his hand, palm up, in full view of the room, in a voice that carried exactly as far as his cousin's had. "Dance for me," he said. It was not a request. It landed on the room like a closed door. Cordelia's smile did not move, but something behind it did. Nell looked at his hand, and then at his face, and understood in the space of a breath that the hired groom called Rafe and the Duke of Mirrorfield were the same hard-boned, dark-eyed man, and that she had spoken to him in a hayloft as though he were nobody at all, and that he had let her. "Your Grace," she said, very low, "I have not the dress for it. I did not ask what you were wearing." His voice did not soften, but something under it did, something only she was standing close enough to hear. "I asked you to dance. She could have refused." She understood, even then, that a duke's command in a public room was not the same thing as a duke's wish, and that he was giving her, in the coldest possible language, the warmest thing he had to give in front of witnesses who would otherwise have spent the evening deciding she did not belong in the room at all. She took his hand. Her body remembered the figure before her mind caught up to it, heel and toe. The weight balanced the way her father had taught her 20 years before, in a room that no longer existed. She did not smile. She did not perform delight for the watchers. She danced the way she worked, plainly, competently, without ornament, and it was, in its way, the most dangerous thing she could have done, because competence without apology is a very hard thing for a room like that to forgive. "You might have told me," she said, under the music, who you were. "I might have. Why didn't you?" "Because I wanted to see who you were," he said, "when you believed no one of rank was watching. You did not know how to be anything but yourself. I have met a great many people this winter who knew exactly how to be something else. That is not a kind thing to test a person with." "No," he agreed. "It is not kind. It is only honest. I have found I would rather have honest." She did not answer that. The music turned them, and Cordelia's face passed across her vision once, white with something that was not quite fury, and was worse than fury, and then it was gone, and there was only the floor, and the cold hand under her own, steady, and her own hand, she noticed distantly, not shaking at all. The whispering began before the dance had properly ended. By the time Nell walked home that night, the story had already changed shape 3 times in the ballroom behind her, each version uglier than the last. She had angled for it, some said. She had been meeting the Duke in the stables under cover of charity for weeks, others said. And the boy's bad leg was a fine piece of theatre for a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. Cordelia said nothing at all in public, which was, Mrs. Prynne remarked grimly the next morning, a far worse sign than if she had said everything. Within the week the Foundling Home's matron received a visit from a magistrate's clerk, sent, it was murmured, at a lady's private word, asking pointed questions about the propriety of a young unmarried woman spending unsupervised hours alone with the estate's stable boys. Nothing was proven, because there was nothing to prove. But the asking was the point. The matron, frightened for the home's precarious funding, told Nell, with real regret and no real choice, that it would be best, for a time, if she did not come on Tuesdays and Thursdays as she had. "They'll send him to the workhouse infirmary if the leg isn't kept up," Nell said. "You know that." "I know it," the matron said. "I am sorry for it. I have 30 children, and a roof half rotted through, and a governor's board that answers to people who are not sorry for anything at all." Nell did not go to the estate that Thursday, nor the one after. She told herself it was for Tam's sake, that her presence had become a danger to him rather than a help, and that was true as far as it went, but underneath it sat something colder, and she was honest enough with herself, in the dark of her own small room, to look at it plainly. She had let a duke take her hand in front of 100 witnesses, and had felt, for the length of one dance, something she had not let herself feel in 5 years, and she did not know now whether he had done it out of decency or out of spite for his cousin, and she found she could not bear to ask and be told it was the second. She wrote him no letter. She was not entitled, she told herself, to write a duke letters. But she stopped coming, and word of that reached him within 2 days, by way of a head groom who reported it baffled and a little aggrieved on the boy's behalf. Julian did not go after her. He told himself, in the cold of his own study, that a woman who withdrew from a man's company after he had exposed her to public cruelty for the sake of his own point-making had every right to withdraw, and that pursuing her now would only compound the wrong of having made a spectacle of her at all. he had wanted in that one furious moment on the ballroom floor, to put his cousin's cruelty in its place, and he had done it by using Nell as the instrument, and it did not matter that his intentions toward her had been kind. The method had not been kind. He understood that now, turning it over by the fire, and the understanding sat in him like a stone. He did not know that Tam had gone 3 weeks without the loft, and that his leg had begun, very slightly, to stiffen again. He knew only that the girl who had not shaken under his hand on the dance floor had gone quiet, and would not be found, and that the quiet was, in its way, worse than anything his cousin had said aloud. Prynne found Nell at the Foundling home on a grey Tuesday in February, sitting with Tam in the common room since the loft was closed to her, doing what small exercises she could manage on a hard bench instead of straw. "You'll ruin your knees on that floor, Mrs., Prynne said, by way of greeting, and sat herself down without being asked, which was her way. "It's the only floor I've got leave to use." "Aye, well, Mrs., Prynne folded her hands. "I've come to tell you something you're too proud to go asking after yourself, so you'll sit and hear it, whether you like it or not." Nell said nothing, which Mrs. Prynne took correctly for permission. "The rent you didn't pay in the autumn," Mrs. Prynne said. "Settled by a fund with no name on it, the physician that comes for this boy. Paid for by a fund with no name on it. The rafters over your own heads in this very building. Measured up by a carpenter who said his fee was already met, by a fund," and here she paused, "with no name on it." "I know all this," Nell said. "I never asked who." "No, that's rather the trouble with you, isn't it?" "You never ask." Mrs. Prynne's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. It was him. It was the Duke, before ever you knew his face, back when he was calling himself Rafe and mucking out stalls to see what sort of woman knelt in his straw for nothing. He asked me himself not to say who sent the money, and I've kept that closer than my own wages this half a year. But I'll not keep it from you now, because you've gone and made yourself miserable over the wrong question. Nell sat very still. "The wrong question. You're asking whether he danced with you to spite his cousin," Mrs. Prynne said. "I'm telling you he was paying your rent before he'd danced with you at all, before he'd told you his own name, before he had any earthly reason to think you'd ever find out and thank him for it. A man doesn't do that to win an argument with his cousin, child. He does that because he can't help himself." Nell did not cry. She had trained herself a long time ago not to cry where it showed, and she did not break that training now, though her hands, folded in her lap, were not quite steady. "Why didn't he tell me?" she said. "Any of it. The rent. The groom. Any of it." "You'll have to ask him that yourself, Mrs., Prynne said. "I expect he has an answer. I expect it isn't a good one, by your reckoning or mine. But I expect it's honest, and that seems to be the only currency that man trades in." She left it there, and left Nell to the rest of the afternoon with Tam's leg and her own thoughts, both of which wanted careful handling. She went to Merrifield Hall 3 days later, not summoned, not expected, walking the whole cold way, because she had not the fare for anything else, and would not have taken it if offered. Mrs. Prynne let her in without a word, and took her, not to the ballroom or any public room, but to a small parlour off the Duke's study, where a fire was already lit, and the smell of wood smoke and beeswax and old leather sat warm in the air, a smaller, kinder smell than the great cold halls beyond it. Julian came in a few minutes after, and stopped in the doorway when he saw her, as though the sight of her cost him something to absorb all at once. Mrs. Prynne told me, Nell said, before he could speak. About the rent, the physician, the rafters, all of it. She had no business doing that. She had every business doing it, since you'd have gone to your grave sooner than tell me yourself, by the look of you. He came further into the room, but did not sit, and did not come too close. I would have told you, he said. Eventually I told myself there was no hurry. And then there was the assembly. And then you were gone, and I thought perhaps I had lost the chance to tell you anything at all. Why keep it secret in the first place? Any of it. The name Rafe. The rent with no name on it. You could have simply been yourself, and been kind, and let me know who to thank. Because the moment you knew I was the Duke, he said, you would have knelt in that straw thinking of what a duke might think of you, and not simply doing what wanted doing. I have spent this whole year learning exactly how differently people behave when they believe a title is watching them, and I did not want to know you that way. I wanted to see what you did when you believed no one of consequence could see you at all. That is the only test I have ever trusted, because it is the only one that cannot be practised for. And the money, the rent, why hide that? Because a gift with my name on it would have been a debt, he said. You would have felt you owed me something for it, gratitude, or worse, obligation, and you would have started weighing your kindness to that boy against what you thought you owed the man who paid for his boots. I did not want to be repaid. I wanted the boy's leg mended, and I wanted you to go on being exactly who you were in that loft, unwatched and unbought. And the dance, she said, was that for the boy's leg too, or for your cousin, or for me? He was quiet a moment. The fire popped once, and settled. It was for you, he said, and it was badly done. I meant to stop Cordelia's cruelty, and I did it in the coldest language I own, because I did not trust myself to do it any gentler in front of that room, without saying a great deal more than I had any right to say to a woman who had not yet chosen to hear it. I made you a spectacle to save you from being made a smaller one, and I have turned it over every night since and found I cannot excuse it. I am sorry for it. That is the whole of my defence, and I know it is a poor one. Nell looked at him a long moment. Somewhere beyond the window a rook called once, harsh in the cold air, and fell silent. You might have simply told me the truth, she said, from the first day in the loft. I might have, he said. I did not know, that first day, that it would come to matter this much whether I did. And now I am telling you all of it in the plainest words I have, because I have learned this winter that concealment, however well meant, is its own kind of cruelty, and I will not practice it on you a moment longer than I already have. He looked at her, and something in his grave face had gone entirely undefended, the way she had not yet seen it. I do not ask you to forgive the dance tonight, or to answer anything tonight. I have no wish to press you the way that room pressed you. I will ask you again, in the spring, whether you can think of me as anything other than the man who made a show of you in a ballroom, and your no will be exactly as safe with me as your yes, because I would rather have your honest refusal than an answer given out of any sense that you must give one. That is a very long way, Nell said, of saying you are fond of me. It is, he said, the only way I trust myself to say it without frightening you into an answer you do not mean. She almost smiled. She did not. Quite, but something in her shoulders, which had been braced since the assembly, let go a little. I am not offended by plain speech, she said. You may say the short version, if you have one. He looked at her for a long moment, weighing it, the way a man weighs a door he has been standing in front of for some time. "I love you," he said. "I have known it since the second week, watching you in that straw, asking nothing of anyone. It has only grown less convenient and more certain since. I do not love you for the boy's leg, or for what it says of your character, admirable as that is. I love you because you are plainly, stubbornly, inconveniently yourself in every room I have ever seen you stand in, and I have not met another soul in 25 years who managed that." Nell was quiet. When she spoke, her voice was steady, though her hands, in her lap, were not quite. "I should like to be spoken to plainly," she said, for the rest of it, whatever the rest of it turns out to be. "Not managed. Not tested without my knowing. If you cannot promise me that, I would rather you said so now." "I can promise you that," he said. "I have learnt this winter what it costs, not to." "Then I do not need the spring," she said. "I will give you my answer now, if you will still have it early. I will have it whenever you choose to give it." "Yes," she said. It was the only word she needed, and she said it plainly, without ornament, the way she said everything that mattered. He crossed the room then, slow, as though giving her every chance to stop him, and took her hand, and drew the worn glove from it finger by finger, and she let him, watching his face rather than her own hand, and when the glove was off he did not kiss her mouth, only the bare knuckles of her hand, once, gently, as though it were the whole of what he had been permitted to ask for, and he did not intend to ask for more than he had been given. "Thank you," she said, "for telling me the truth of it, even the parts that shamed you to tell. Thank you," he said, "for staying in that loft long enough for me to see the truth of you." They were married in the spring, in the small stone church at Hartwell, with considerably less ceremony than the county expected of a duke, and considerably more warmth than it was used to seeing at any wedding at all. Cordelia did not attend. She had removed to Bath by then, at her own family's quiet insistence, after a season in which her cruelty had become too widely remarked to be socially convenient, and she wrote, once, a stiff and unread letter that Mrs. Prynne consigned to the fire without troubling the Duchess with it. Tam walked into the church on his own 2 legs, a little unevenly, favouring the mended leg out of old habit more than necessity, and stood at the front through the whole ceremony, because he had told anyone who would listen that he meant to see it properly, having had, as he put it, rather a hand in bringing it about. Godwin the physician declared him, within the year, as sound as any boy in the county, and Tam went on to make himself indispensable in the Merrifield stables, where he was, by all accounts, insufferably proud of both his legs, and would tell the story of the loft to anyone who stood still long enough. Mrs. Prynne kept her place at Merrifield until her hair went entirely white, and was, by her own frequent insistence, owed a great deal more credit for the whole business than anyone troubled to give her, which she said with such regularity that it became, in time, a kind of household joke, affectionately worn. A year to the day after the New Year assembly, Julian and Nell sat by the fire in the small parlour off the study, the same room where he had told her the truth of himself, and the same smell of wood smoke and beeswax sat in the air as it had that night. Outside the window the garden had gone to frost again, the way it did every winter, and somewhere beyond the hedge a rook called once, and was answered by nothing. Nell had a pair of dance slippers by the hearth, old and mended many times over. The same pair her father had bought her the year before the debts took everything else, and she kept them there still, not worn, only kept, the way a person keeps the one thing that proves who they were before anyone troubled to notice. Julian took her bare hand in his, without ceremony the way he did most evenings now, and did not let it go, and she did not draw it back. A person is only ever what they do when they believe no one worth impressing is watching, and it is a poor sort of love that waits for an audience to prove itself, when the truest kind has never once needed one.